Hi, I'm Kristen Goodwin. On this episode of the Fox News Rundown, a study from the Associated Press Nork Center for Public Affairs Research finding President Biden is receiving high marks for how he's handling his job overall, but 46% of Americans disapprove of his approach to the increasing number of unaccompanied migrant children arriving at the U.S.-Mexico border. Fox News White House correspondent Peter Doocy and Fox News radio political analyst Josh Kraushaar discuss the administration's take on immigration and border security. President Biden announcing executive actions to curb gun violence. Fox News Sunday host Chris Wallace breaks down these measures, the likelihood of passing a bipartisan infrastructure bill, and details his experience recently receiving the COVID-19 vaccine. Plus commentary by Fox News contributor Liz Peek. The Fox News Rundown is a daily news podcast where we take a deeper look at the stories important to you. You can subscribe on your favorite podcast player by going to foxnewspodcast.com.
I'm Martha McCallum.
I'm Bill Hemmer.
I'm Shannon Bream, and this is the Fox News Rundown. Friday, April 9th, 2021. I'm Lisa Brady. The White House says it is focusing on a migrant surge, but so far it hasn't been on the president's public schedule.
I think the main reason why President Biden, Vice President Harris haven't made a trip to the border is they don't want to make this a central issue. They know it's a political vulnerability and they'd rather talk about other things.
I'm Chris Foster. There was a lot of hand-wringing among some liberals when Joe Biden won the Democrats' presidential nomination. Maybe they didn't have as much to worry about as they thought.
I think he's moved considerably further to the left. I think he's been a more ambitious president and a more liberal president in terms of his proposals than I expected.
We speak with Fox News Sunday host Chris Wallace.
I'm Liz Peek. I've got the final word on the Fox News Rundown.
Numbers speak for themselves. Nearly 19,000 unaccompanied children taken into U.S. custody at the southern border with Mexico just in the month of March, a new record for any month. This follows the broader report of more than 172,000 immigrants detained or arrested while trying to cross illegally in March, the highest in nearly 2 decades. And the surge continues. His story went viral. A young boy telling a Border Patrol agent he had spent the night alone in the desert after the people he traveled with abandoned him on their way to the border. Luis Cifuentes is the mayor of Eagle Pass, Texas.
We need your help to make sure that Washington understands. If they continue to catch and release the way they're doing right now, it's just going to create a bigger and bigger problem.
He's one of the officials who met with a group of Republican lawmakers in McAllen, Texas, as members of Congress continue to make trips to the border. There have also been visits by senior administration officials, including the Homeland Security Secretary, but still not the president or vice president.
There's no question this is a difficult challenge, and the president believes he was elected to address hard problems.
White House spokeswoman Jen Psaki says they're working to address root causes, restart programs for children to seek asylum in the U.S. from within their home countries, and expedite processing at the border.
The administration's main focus is getting all of these unaccompanied kids that come into their custody out of the first stage of custody quickly.
Fox News White House correspondent Peter Doocy.
So the first place they go are these Customs and Border Protection, Border Patrol, a facility the New York Times described as being jail-like. The law is they're only supposed to be there 72 hours. In many cases recently, because of the surge, it's been a lot longer than 72 hours. So they're trying to get these children out of those facilities into HHS care as fast as possible. But because there are now so many, almost 20,000 unaccompanied kids, what the administration is doing is looking at places around the country that they can hold these children. If it's not in a giant facility like a convention center, then with an approved sponsor family or a blood relative somewhere in the United States. And so the focus is just getting these children out of Border Patrol's hands as quickly as they can. And as we've seen, Border Patrol has their hands completely full in the first stage, which is at the actual border crossing.
There's an ongoing debate about whether conditions are actually any better than they would have been under the Trump administration, especially given that there are so many people crowded into some of these facilities in an ongoing pandemic. And that debate over conditions no doubt will continue. But you've been pressing spokeswoman Jen Psaki during the White House briefings on this issue, many different angles of the issue. Have you noticed any change in how they're responding to the questions about this surge?
Yeah, there's been a big change because in February, the first time that I asked about this, Psaki insisted that they just needed one facility in Carrizo Springs, Texas for some overflow because of COVID regulations. But now we know these facilities are at several hundred times their capacity, COVID or no COVID. They got the sign off from the CDC to be at 100% capacity. There's nowhere else in the country that you can be at 100% capacity right now because of COVID regulations. No other government facility. And so they obviously now are talking about it differently than that. And something else that they are focusing on, it's less about what is happening at the border and more about what is happening south of Mexico in these so-called Northern Triangle countries, Ecuador, Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador. And, why is it that people want to leave there? And they say that the point person on this, the Vice President Kamala Harris, is focusing her attention there. And that is also why they say she has not been to the border to see things for herself and report back to President Biden.
Well, the vice president did speak to the Mexican president on Wednesday, but Mexico would seem to be under less pressure now to help stem the flow into the U.S., right?
Well, publicly, it does not sound like there is a ton of pressure coming from the administration for them to do more. We've heard that there are negotiations about how Mexico can help more, but there's not a ton of public pressure where the president or the vice president are saying, you got to do this or else.
Right, and the Remain in Mexico policy that President Trump had put in place is gone. So there's definitely been a change in the flow, how the flow works, if you will, how people apply for asylum. Do you get the sense, being there at the White House every day, that they're more concerned about these numbers at the border than they're admitting publicly? Have you seen any evidence of that?
We have not seen a ton of evidence about it. The messaging going out publicly from the press room and from the president and the vice president, different members of the cabinet who have been talking about this, is consistent with what we hear off camera, which is that they think that they are still trying to undo some Trump-era policies they didn't like, but that everything is in control.
What about any worry that this topic could derail other parts of their agenda and hurt the party in 2022?
No concern about that. If you talk to people from the White House, they really think that the first few months have been a great success because they were able to get $1,400 checks out to people as part of that American Rescue Plan, even though it was just a partisan exercise on Capitol Hill. And they now see themselves as responsible for possibly rebuilding the whole country from damage done by COVID-19, but also damage done just by Father Time with, crumbling roads and bridges, and then damage to the environment because they are talking about a whole green makeover for the entire country. And so they think they're looking forward more than looking at the past and kind of policies that have led to this surge at the border or things the president said in the past that have encouraged people to surge the border.
The president is getting mixed reviews on his handling of border security and immigration, more than half disapproving on those issues in a recent AP NORC Center poll.
We're now talking about something of a crisis with the number of migrants, illegal immigrants coming across the border, hitting record highs.
Josh Kraushaar is a Fox News Radio political analyst and political editor at the National Journal.
And look, there are a lot of cross pressures that this administration is facing. There's a lot of mixed public opinion on immigration and border security. But look, the White House wants to talk about the economy. They want to talk about their infrastructure bill, and yet the scenes of the border, the overcrowded nature of these holding facilities, the chaotic scenes that we're seeing on a day-to-day basis, they're creating a big political headache, and they're not going away anytime soon.
The White House has also downplayed criticism that the president and vice president haven't actually visited the border. Is that something that the American public is really paying attention to? Do they care about those kind of optics, or they just want results?
They care about optics. I think the main reason why President Biden, Vice President Harris haven't made a trip to the border is they don't want to make this a central issue. They know it's a political vulnerability, and they'd rather talk about other things. They don't view immigration as a winning issue for them politically. They don't want to have pictures or headlines about the border security situation. They think they can avoid it. They think they can kind of allow other stories to take center stage. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's also sort of strange that the vice president was named to sort of be a point person for some of these immigration issues, and yet she's sort of been absent AWOL and absent in a public way, at least in these recent weeks. So it's one of these lingering issues that's a problem politically for the president, and if it continues to get worse, it only becomes more of a challenge.
What about the blame game on this? Is that something that could backfire politically? Because the Biden administration has tried a few different ways to blame the Trump administration for the current surge, first saying that, the previous administration's restrictions led to pent-up demand, and then arguing that President Trump broke the asylum system that had been in place, and so now they're having to rebuild it. Could that, backfire with voters?
Yeah, the blame game never really works. I mean, the problem is that immigration was such a big issue for so many elements of the Democratic Party base that Biden took away a lot of Trump's tough immigration rules the second he took over in office, and it created adverse consequences. It sounded good. It was stuff that made Democrats feel good, but ultimately the results are what they are. The White House has also said that this is a seasonal surge that Trump himself has had overseen, and when he was president. But now we're well beyond the numbers that Trump had to face even before his tough on border security policies. So this is you break it, you own it. The Pottery Barn rule applies to immigration and border security as well. And when you have to start taking over hotels to house children of illegal immigrants, children coming across the border, that's just not a good set of optics. It doesn't seem to be an adequate response to the growing crisis on the U.S.-Mexico border.
Even though this is an issue that apparently rallies the Republican base, does it translate into midterm voter turnout in 2022 in northern red and purple states, though?
Well, I don't think immigration is going to be the top issue, even if you still have a problematic situation at the border. But it is an issue that is going to likely turn out Republicans, conservative Republicans in particular, that are very supportive of President Trump's immigration policies and view the crisis as one of Biden's own making. And I also think that you have some of these border districts in Texas. In fact, that one of the more surprising elements of the last election is that Republicans did really well. Trump made major inroads in some of these Texas, even New Mexico border districts because of real worries about immigration. So, I don't think it's going to have massive political consequences, but in a midterm with one party in power, it's a motivating force for Republicans to turn out in opposition to what's going on.
We're still less than 100 days into the Biden presidency. Is your early outlook on 2022 changing at all, or too soon?
My outlook on 2022 is that Republicans are it's early, but I think they're very well positioned to take back the House majority unless Democrats can really show, and the Democrats have had a pretty good 100 days. Joe Biden's approval rating is above 50%, but the narrow House majority that Democrats hold is going to be awfully shaky in a midterm election, number one, and number two, with redistricting taking place. That should advantage Republicans on the margins. The Senate, I think, is a different story. I actually think Democrats have a chance to hold the Senate. They might even gain a seat or two, but because of some of these internal Republican issues in these big states, it's a long way off. A lot of time left, but it's really the House that's the most attractive option for Republicans to get an avenue back into power. I think Kevin McCarthy is seen as the more likely Republican leader come 2022 than Mitch McConnell.
Josh Kraushaar, thanks so much for your time. Always great to have you.
Thanks, Lisa.
This is Liz Peek with your Fox News commentary coming up.
President Biden says he wants Congress to do more about gun violence, like reinstating a federal ban on assault weapons and magazines holding more than 10 rounds of ammunition. He voted for it as a senator in 1994, but the law was allowed to expire 10 years later. In the meantime, he says he's doing what he can by executive action in ways, he says, that do not go against the Second Amendment right to bear arms.
No amendment to the Constitution is absolute. You can't yell fire in a crowded movie theater. We call it freedom of speech. From the very beginning, you couldn't own any weapon you wanted to own. From the very beginning that the Second Amendment existed, certain people weren't allowed to have weapons.
Montana Senate Republican Steve Daines tells Fox.
It's this kind of knee-jerk reaction of the left. It's kind of more this kind of virtue signaling, like, okay, we're going to do something here regarding gun control to try to appease the liberals. But I can tell you it's not going to make us any safer. It just infringes on our Second Amendment rights. It infringes on law-abiding Americans.
On the other side, there are people disappointed the president isn't doing more on guns.
Well, I don't think he can jump right into the fray.
Chris Wallace is the host of Fox News Sunday.
In the sense that, he said in the campaign, I'm going to have a legislation on guns that I'm going to submit my first day in office. He's been in office, about 75 days now, and he's never submitted legislation because he knows it's going to go nowhere. I mean, there's just not a chance in the world that you're going to get 60 votes, and this isn't something reconciliation. This is pure non-budget legislation. So he's doing executive orders, and there are real limits to what you can do by executive order. And to take, for example, the thing that's getting the most coverage is an executive order on ghost guns, something I didn't, frankly, knew about. And these are guns that you get the kit through the internet, or you create parts of it on a 3D printer, and that this isn't regulated. And he says, let's regulate it. And I think that's a reasonable thing. You have to keep up with technology. But the last time I checked, Chris, there aren't a lot of mass shootings with ghost guns. So it may help, but it's not going to solve the problem.
Yeah, I don't think, as far as I know, there's never been one. One thing that Democrats can apparently now get through with reconciliation and avoid a filibuster is this infrastructure plan, whatever it ends up looking like. The president says he knows that what he's putting out there is a starting point for negotiations. He knows he isn't going to get everything he wants.
This is interesting because contrast it with the COVID relief bill. The president started at $1.9 trillion, and he ended at $1.9 trillion. That's what he signed. In this case, the president started with $2.25 trillion for the jobs plan, most of it supposedly for infrastructure, and raising taxes from 21 to 28% over 15 years. He's really coming off both of those now. And it's clear he's got a problem not only with Republicans, he's got a problem with some Democrats. And I thought actually the most interesting statement this week, it didn't get a lot of coverage, but I think it was really interesting, is Chris Coons, the senator from Biden's home state of Delaware, very close to the president, started saying, maybe we need a smaller package, more traditional infrastructure, which Roy Blunt, a Republican senator, talked about on my show last Sunday. He said $600-700 billion if you're really talking about roads and bridges, and yes, maybe even things like expanding broadband. I think that we're not going to end up anywhere near $2.25 trillion, and I suspect that the taxes as a result the tax increases will be cut back dramatically too.
Yeah, maybe you see something like 25. I mean, before President Trump, it was 35. The tax reform laws dropped it to 21. In the late 60s, it was almost 53%. So, I mean, the trick, I'm not an economist, the trick is to find the sweet spot where you make the most revenue without hurting businesses or driving business away.
Exactly. You want to find that point where you can raise as much revenue as you can without it having a declining effect on business. And at 21%, we're one of the lowest tax business countries in the world. At 28%, we'd be, I think, number one in the OECD, which is the economic community. So somewhere, I'm not a tax expert either, but somewhere between 21 and 28, there's probably a reasonable number.
A lot of this stuff that President Biden is proposing and now may not end up getting, you could have heard it during the campaign coming out of Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren's mouth. I mean, but somehow it comes off to my ear as less radical just by who he is and his manner of speaking when President Biden brings this stuff up.
Yeah, yes and no. It may sound a little less radical, but it's still pretty radical. I would say the big surprise to me over these first 75 days or so of the Biden presidency is that for all of his history as a centrist and center-left, but, more moderate and certainly campaigning against the far-left candidates in 2019 and 20, like Warren, like Sanders, I think he's moved considerably further to the left. I think he's been a more ambitious president and a more liberal president in terms of his proposals than I expected. So it may sound less liberal, but I think it's pretty darn liberal. He's a big tax and spend Democrat. And, when you think back, not only to Ronald Reagan, who in 1981 in his inaugural address said that government isn't the solution, government is the problem, and Bill Clinton, I think after 1994, when he took a whipping in the midterm election, said the era of big government is over. I think big government is back.
Yeah, it sure seems like it. The Republican Party, the GOP, holds a big donors conference in Florida this weekend. They're going to hear from a lot of people who are rumored to want to run for president themselves. Mike Pompeo, Marco Rubio, Rick Scott. I think Tom Cotton's going to be there. The party fundraising could really be complicated by former President Trump's separate fundraising operation.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, everything is complicated by President Trump in terms of holding himself out there as a potential candidate in 2024. You would begin to see, let's assume he said, I'm done. I've got a great 4 years and I'm retiring from politics. The political situation, even this early on, just a few months after the election, would be completely different. We political junkies in the business would be just all a skitter, all a Twitter about, who's up, who's down, is Ron DeSantis and Pompeo and Nikki Haley and the various senators and all of that. And it's all damped down by the fact that, and as long as he's a potential candidate and leaving the door wide open as he is, Donald Trump is the overwhelming front runner to win the nomination in 2024. And as a result, and I can understand why he's doing it now, because the second he says, I'm done, we're not going to pay any attention to him. We're talking about him right now. And as soon as he says he's done, nobody or many fewer people will contribute to his PAC. But as the leader of the party, I think in effect he is still, and as a potential 2024 nominee, he casts a huge shadow. He hoovers up a lot of money, and he makes it more difficult for everybody else who just basically has to wait and see, to look for the smoke signals out of Mar-a-Lago.
Well, Chris, it was Easter last weekend. I remember you mentioning around Christmas, I think it was, plans to meet some of your family, like in a park halfway between homes, because everybody was, so being respectful of the coronavirus threat. You feeling more social now that you're fully vaccinated?
Yeah, but, I got to say, and I last week had Dr. Michael Osterholm, who's one of the top public health experts from the University of Minnesota on, and I was talking to him about the mixed messages. Just last week, you had the CDC, supposedly the great authority on public health issues for the country, come out and say, if you're fully vaccinated, it is safe to travel on an airplane. But then they said, in the next breath, but we still argue against a non-essential travel. And I asked Osterholm, well, how am I supposed to figure that out? And he said, I agree. It's completely contradictory. So, for instance, this week we have my daughter and son-in-law and their 7-month-old baby, Teddy, who is absolutely adorable. And we're doing it without masks, but, I'm a little nervous about it. So I don't know. This will be, as we get more vaccinated, first of all, I can't say that we're anywhere near the end of the pandemic because you're getting 60,000 cases, more than 1,000 people dying every day. But, as that, we hope, ramps down in the course of the late spring and summer and into the early fall, we'll open up a bit. But, I don't think, I agree with the president. We're not at the finish line yet, unfortunately.
Yeah. I mean, as far as my personal stuff, I've got 2 girls who are going to be starting kindergarten in the fall, and I sure hope that they're doing it without masks and they're doing it like having a normal old first year of school. Yeah, but at this point, you're not sure, are you? Nope, I'm certainly not. Yeah, no, it's and that's the crazy thing. And at what point
Fox, for instance, has said the earliest that we're going to all return will be Labor Day. If at Labor Day, and I hope by Labor Day we can all go back to work, the first few days that you're in the elevator with people and you're in the offices and people are walking past you and maybe they're not wearing masks anymore. Maybe, we'll see what the rules are at that point. That's going to be an odd experience. No question about it. It was odd going in to the lockdown. It's odd coming out of the lockdown.
Yeah. Chris Wallace, host of Fox News Sunday. Chris, good to talk to you.
Thank you, Chris.
From the Fox News Podcasts Network.
I'm Ben Domenech, publisher of The Federalist, and I'm inviting you to join a new conversation with the smartest thinkers out there about the country and where we're going. Subscribe to the Ben Domenech Podcast.
Subscribe and listen now by going to foxnewspodcasts.com. Rate and review the Fox News Rundown on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen.
And now, some good news with Tanya J. Powers.
13-year-old Cadence Hensley hadn't expected to rescue a small child while on her Disney vacation, but that's exactly what happened. Cadence, who is from New Mexico, was on spring break in Orlando, Florida, hanging out at the pool with her family when she saw a toddler floating face down in the deep end. She says her instincts kicked in and she pulled 3-year-old Haven Williams out of the water. A bystander performed CPR and Haven was taken to the hospital. She's expected to make a full recovery. The families swapped information so they could stay in touch and have even shared photos on Easter. Cadence also sent Haven a friendship necklace for the little girl's 4th birthday. Haven's mom, who works at a children's hospital in Missouri, says she never thought something like this would happen to her child and is grateful for Cadence's quick thinking. As for Cadence, she's taking steps to be even more prepared in case something like this happens again in the future. She's signed up for CPR classes. Tanya J. Powers, Fox News.
It's time for your Fox News commentary. Liz Peek. What's on your mind?
The White House claims that bills passed with zero GOP input or votes, like the $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan, can still be bipartisan if polls show support from some Republican voters. Sure, and Joe Biden created the vaccines, too. America, we have been duped again. Just like Barack Obama in 2008, Biden campaigned on a promise to bring the country together and to work across the aisle. And just like Obama, Biden has done nothing of the sort. Instead, he has chosen from day one of his administration to follow a narrow partisan path, embracing policies and rhetoric offensive to Republicans. It's intentional and also unavoidable. Much has changed in the 13 years since we elected our first Black president. Democrats' embrace of the politics of division has not. Why would it? Why not turn red against blue, black against white, Asian against non-Asian, rich against poor, and gay against straight, when it so effectively energizes and turns out Democratic voters? Democrat thinking today seems crazy to many common sense Americans. It might even have seemed untenable to then candidate Obama. For example, today's Democrats believe that allowing hundreds of thousands of poor, uneducated people to enter our country illegally will make the United States more prosperous. That teachers' unions should not be held accountable for the deplorable failures of our inner city schools, even as we pay more than almost any country on earth for public education. That raising taxes on employers will promote hiring. That we should sacrifice our productive and efficient energy industries on the altar of climate change, even though China's emissions are twice those of the U.S. and growing rapidly, while ours are shrinking. That our country is systemically racist, even though Black Americans have proportionate representation in Congress and we have twice elected a Black president. Many of these ideas don't make sense. Some are downright offensive, but all help explain why President Biden will struggle to attract support for his progressive programs. To see just how radical Democrats' leftward lurch has been, it's interesting to review Obama's acceptance speech for the Democratic nomination in 2008, which suggested where his party was then. Obama talked about America's promise and also the limits of big government, saying, quote, The market should reward drive and innovation and generate growth, unquote, while admitting that government cannot solve all of our problems. While Biden wants to hike taxes by $3 trillion to feed his emerging government Goliath, Obama called to eliminate capital gains taxes for the small businesses and startups that will create the high-wage, high-tech jobs of tomorrow. To his credit, Obama recognized the horrific power wielded by the teachers' unions, the organized labor groups that have kept our schools closed in defiance of the science and the needs of families. This trip down memory lane is not meant to portray Obama as a moderate. He was not and is not today. Rather, it's meant to demonstrate how far to the left progressives, who make up only about 15% of Democrats, have pushed their party and Joe Biden, and how impossible it will be for Biden to heal the nation, even if he actually wanted to. I'm Liz Peek, Fox News contributor.
You've been listening to the Fox News Rundown. Stay up to date by subscribing to this podcast at foxnewspodcasts.com. And for up-to-the-minute news, go to foxnews.com.
Jason in the House, the Jason Chaffetz podcast. Dive deeper than the headlines and the party lines as I take on American life, politics, and entertainment. Subscribe now on foxnewspodcasts.com or wherever you download podcasts.
Love Fox News? Click the subscribe button to get more of the news and opinion you trust. And click the Fox News Rundown playlist for the latest episodes.